Well, good afternoon and welcome to Live Impact News right here on 13 News Now Plus. Tuesday, January 6th, 1:01 p.m. The clock just turned 1:01 p.m. I am Connor Reel here for the next 2 hours with you for all of the most live, breaking, impactful news that you need to know here locally in the 757, nationally and globally as well. As always, we are joined by the People's producer, Nia Campbell. Nia, how are things on this Tuesday afternoon?
It's going good. I'm energized, ready for the day. How are you?
It is fantastic that you are energized because it is a very busy day. As we mentioned off the top of the show, it is January 6th. January 6th represents two different headline-making, newsworthy anniversaries here in Hampton Roads. Of course, on the national scale, it is the 5-year anniversary of the insurrection at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. January 6th of 2021, towards the end of President Donald Trump's first term, there was a crowd, a mob of people who stormed the United States Capitol building as the final votes of that presidential election were being affirmed. Not only did they storm the Capitol building, they broke into the Capitol building on January 6th of 2021, an insurrection at the Capitol, a mob that was marching on the Capitol and eventually made their way into the building with elected officials in the building at the time. At the bottom of your screen here, as we're about to take our three box, at the bottom of your screen, you will see a march that is being conducted by the Proud Boys. They are retracing the steps to the Capitol that mob took on January 6, 2021, on this 5-year anniversary. The Proud Boys, one of the groups that sort of aligns with a conservative movement, and they are, again, doing this in what is almost a remembrance of the insurrection of the Capitol, if you will, a retracing of the steps. And we will continue to monitor anything that is happening in Washington, D.C. today on this 5th anniversary of that riot. On the top of your screen, you see Democratic members of the January 6th Select Committee who are holding a special hearing to mark that 5th anniversary. Elaine Loria, a former congressional representative from right here in Hampton Roads in District 2, is a part of that committee and has been one of the members participating in this special hearing. And so we will be checking in on that event live, as again, it is the 5th anniversary of the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, when a crowd of people marched on and then eventually entered the United States Capitol building as the vote was being affirmed of the 2020 presidential election. So that is one anniversary that we are monitoring on a national scale. The anniversary that we are monitoring here on a local scale today marks 3 years since the Rich Neck Elementary School shooting in Newport News. First grade teacher, or at the time a first grade teacher, Abby Zwerner, was shot and critically injured by her 6-year-old student. Obviously, we covered a trial at length that happened earlier this year where Abby Zwerner brought a lawsuit against Newport News Public Schools and eventually won an award of $10 million in that lawsuit. That's something that we covered, I say earlier this year, I guess I have to start saying late last year. We've officially moved into 2026, but late last year, that was a trial that we covered extensively. It went into October. She had asked for $40 million. She was ultimately awarded $10 million in that lawsuit. At the same time, Rich Neck's former vice principal, Dr. Ebony Parker, still faces multiple felony child abuse charges in connection with the shooting. That trial is scheduled to begin later this year. So 2 major anniversaries that we are monitoring today on January 6th here on Live Impact News. And we will begin by going live for a moment out to that committee hearing, the January 6th Select Committee hearing in Washington, D.C. Let's begin there for this 2 hours of Live Impact News.
And those too afraid to stand up for him. I, too, was one of the few dozen members of Congress trapped in the House gallery, one of the very last to be evacuated. I had just had knee surgery. I was unable to easily move. I had a cane ready to whack insurrectionists that came in. To this day, I vividly hear the pounding on the doors, the screaming of insurrectionists threatening to kill us. And when we finally escaped, I still see those insurrectionists lying spread-eagled on the floor, surrounded by those brave Capitol Police officers with guns pointed at them. I didn't know if I would make it out alive that night. And in the early hours of the next morning, I am so proud that Democrats and a few brave Republicans came back and fulfilled our enormous responsibility to certify the election and ensure a peaceful transfer of power. And I am forever indebted to our incredible gallery group that formed that very next day and that was there throughout this time for each other. However, the personal and collective trauma of that day remain. You hear it here today. And the after effects have continued to ripple out. Trump's pardoning of over 1,500 insurrectionists, the largest pardon of violent criminal offenders in our history, made a mockery of our justice system and allowed for several to recommit violence. Our brave Capitol Police officers and law enforcement officers who defended and even died for our country have still not seen a congressionally mandated plaque installed that honors their service. The refusal of most Senate Republicans to convict Trump after the House impeached him allowed for his return as president, this time unleashed to steal Americans' health care, enrich himself, and engage in authoritarian behavior that violates our Constitution and our separation of powers. Without accountability, our democracy is not safe, and this can happen again with worse consequences. For 244 years, we have had peaceful transfers of power. The founders planned for a potential dictator as president, but they did not plan for an entire party to follow that dictator. They had faith that members of Congress of both parties would put country first. That faith is being severely tested. In the courts, there is one last chance to hold Trump accountable with a case that several of us members filed to ensure that we have guardrails against tyranny. And here in Congress, we have a responsibility every single day to never rest until we have that real accountability for that day. That is the only way we can keep our republic. And I am grateful to you, Mr. Chairman, and our colleagues for having this testimony today. I yield back.
Thank you so much. I thank our colleagues for appearing here today. And I'll now excuse you and invite our next panel of witnesses to take their seat.
Okay, so it appears as though there is a break in that select committee hearing to commemorate the 5th anniversary of January 6th. Again, that is a committee that was conjoined specifically to investigate January 6th. And they are now meeting again today to commemorate and discuss and reflect, as you heard certain elected officials during that hearing with emotional testimony about the day of January 6th. Now, they did take a break. It looks like they may start up again, but I do believe that will be going for some time. We also have a live event right now with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Now, Tim Walz, just yesterday, we reported that he was suspending his campaign for a third term as governor of Minnesota. And of course, this campaign suspension comes in the midst of a federal probe into welfare fraud, alleged welfare fraud when it comes to certain programs, daycare programs included in the state of Minnesota. It also comes on the heels of President Donald Trump vocally attacking the Somali population in Minnesota and sending deportation agents into Minneapolis and St. Paul with the specific intention of monitoring the Somali community, if you will. So a lot happening in Minnesota. In the midst of all of that, Governor Tim Walz announcing the suspension of his campaign for a third term. He is live at the podium now. It looks like he is taking questions from assembled press. Let's go live out to Minnesota.
We got the Axtell report back on Capitol security, and that's my next step on this. And I do want to kind of preview a little bit here. If Republicans think that I'm not coming to make us more safe around guns, they are sadly mistaken. They are going to take votes on protecting our children, or they're not going to get anything else done. When that report comes back, that will give us, I think, some idea where we're going. I'm excited to see and hopeful what Tim O'Malley's going to see. I think you're seeing this. I feel pretty the safeguards in place, probably have to come back to the legislature. It'll be interesting to see, and I really do appreciate that question about the fraud committee. If I'm not mistaken, this planned meeting on fraud in this program before it implemented was the very first meeting ahead of trying to prevent. I need the legislator to help me on prevention. It's pretty easy after the fact to say this happened. They're really good at that. They're not so good on the front end, so I think that would be good. But I just want to say again to all of you, incredibly grateful. I'm gonna make note of this. I had my team verify this. I've stood in front of the press more than any governor in Minnesota history and taken more questions from the press in Minnesota history. My team has provided more data under the Data Practices Act than any governor in history. And I'm going to preview for you now and I would ask all of you for the help on this. It seems absolutely outrageous and a gap to me. The only people who aren't subject in state government to data practices are the legislature. And we've had a pedophile in the state Senate that we got no information about. We have credible accusations of one Republican representative against another Republican representative that they committed fraud. We have a requirement that the House run an audit, which they did not do. You are the gatekeepers on this. Demand that there's data practices, and if they have emails showing that I have committed fraud, you should get those. Why aren't they putting them out there? Why aren't they turning them over to prosecutors? And right now, they are hiding behind a veil of innuendo. They're protecting the biggest fraudster in the White House. They are unwilling to acknowledge that January 6th was an insurrection. They are unwilling to stand with Melissa Hortman's children. And I want to tell you this, for those legislators who went and shed crocodile tears at her funeral, shame on you. Shame on you. Her children are asking you to do one thing in her name. It's to tell the president to stop doing this. That shouldn't be that difficult. So look, for Republicans here, I have more energy than I've ever had. I am committed to this state more than I've ever been. I love this state with every fiber of my being. I believe we are the best state. Have I been perfect in this? God dang no. I wasn't perfect as a teacher. I wasn't perfect as a coach. I wasn't perfect as a soldier, but I was pretty damn good at all those things. And I am committed to getting this right. And I will tell you what, if they think now, I mean, game's over for them now. It was all me. I was the bad guy or whatever. Well, put up or shut up now and tell us what you're going to do to make this state better. Answer these tough questions. Quit hiding behind this and expect for the next 11 months for me to ride you like you've never been ridden, to make sure that you're doing your job. I'm asking for your help. We need data practices with the legislature right now. You need to expect to get every one of my emails just like you have when you ask for them. Every one of my commissioners, you should be able to ask for those, which you can do, and we need to do that. Here's the thing that I'm going to ask all of you is, Republicans want to tear this state down. Republicans want to tell you it's too dangerous to walk down the streets. Republicans want to tell you there's nothing good comes out of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Republicans want to tell you everybody with brown skin is stealing money or that they're not welcome here. They want to do nothing to improve this state. Their idea of improving this state is being a parrot for Donald Trump, agreeing to everything that he agreed with. Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. It ain't happening. I'm not going anywhere. And you can make all your requests for me to resign over my dead body. Will that happen? I will fight this thing till the very end to make this state better. And the question that I think they need to decide is when did the guy in the White House resign? When does he take accountability for what he did? Because it isn't going to happen here in terms of us shying away from making the state better. So you'll get to see me more. The good news is on this is that I got no election to look forward to. I've been in front of you. I'll call on who I want to call on, and I'll watch what the press gets written, and we'll make sure that in this state there's full accountability for everybody, because buck stops with me. I'm accountable for this. And because of that accountability, I'm not running for office again. But I have a year to continue to improve on a record that I think will stand up against anybody's, a record that has made Minnesota better, a record that makes people want to come here, and a record that has respected not only the dignity of people, but the idea of rule of law and camaraderie. So the one thing that I hate is anytime I get drug into being next to Donald Trump, God help me, I don't want to be judged against that guy. Judge me against an average Minnesotan going out to do their job every day and being decent to their neighbors. So thank you all, and we'll be back.
Thanks, folks. Appreciate it.
We got it.
All right, so that concludes Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota's press conference speaking about the fraud allegations that persist against certain welfare programs in the state of Minnesota. So that press conference has ended, which means we will go back out to the live press conference happening with the January 6th committee that is in commemoration of the 5-year anniversary, personal testimonies amongst other speakers at that committee hearing. Again, a reminder on the bottom of your screen is a Proud Boys event. They are retracing the steps that rioters took to the Capitol on January 6th before the insurrection at the Capitol happened. January 6th, a group that has aligned themselves with the conservative movement, some would say with extreme views within the conservative movement. And again, they are marching, retracing the steps of rioters as they approach the Capitol building, the same path that was taken on that day before the break-in eventually happened at the Capitol building. Now, before we do any of that, I do want to give a brief update on sad news that happened today, or that was announced today. Republican Doug LaMalfa, a 7-term United States representative from California, has died. He was 65 years old. That was announced today that he passed away. He had more than a dozen years in Congress. He was a member of the Republican Party and was a frequent speaker on the House floor. So Republican Representative Doug LaMalfa has passed away at the age of 65. We wanted to make sure we reported that sad news before we continue. Now, we also, earlier today, President Donald Trump spoke for some time at a podium, and this comes in the midst of our main story from yesterday, which was in regards to the United States actions in Venezuela. A military operation over the weekend extracted the president of Venezuela and his wife, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife, brought them back to the United States. Yesterday, they emptied not guilty pleas for drug and weapons charges that have been brought against them by the United States. That situation obviously is ongoing, and President Donald Trump spoke for some time. He touched on a number of different topics, including that. That was earlier today. We will certainly get to those comments at some point during our stream. I think for now, we will stick with our live event, which is the January 6th committee and the hearing they are holding on this 5th anniversary of the insurrection at the Capitol by rioters on January 6th, 2021. Let's go live back out to Washington, D.C.
Chamber. At some point, I saw kind of disorder on the floor, and the sergeant at arms coming down, and some of the member on the dais who was presiding coming down, and I knew something was happening. And I looked down and I yelled, "Call Trump and tell him to call his Revolutionary Guard off." Of course, they didn't do that, but it was the Revolutionary Guard, and they still are there. And I don't know if they're with ICE or if they're standing for another time, stand back, but stand by. They're around, and Trump hadn't changed. I got up, and an officer came who was helping protect him, make sure the doors were locked, and I heard the pounding on the doors and all, and he helped me put my mask on. And I was walking out. David Trone preceded me to go out in the gallery, and there's rails in the gallery, and we were going out towards the Republican side, and Trone just put his leg over it and kind of went on. Well, I got a real bad leg from having polio, and I knew if I put my leg over there, I might get stuck on that pole, and that'd be real embarrassing. It may be painful, too. So I limboed, a kind of a reverse limbo, and got under the rail and got out. We got in an elevator, and we came down, and a couple of guys said, "Where do we go now?" I said, "Just follow me and come on." And we went as fast as we could towards Rayburn while we saw policemen come in the opposite direction with their guns out. It was a scary time. I got to my office in Rayburn, I locked the doors to the outside, and I locked myself in my office. And while I was there, I probably got at least 500 texts and phone calls from everybody I'd ever met in my life, I think. Well, my hero as a child was a ball player named Minnie Minoso. We maintained a friendship through his life and up until the fact in essence, got him in the Hall of Fame, helped with that, and we were friends and we'll be friends forever. So I'm sitting there with got a Minnie Minoso bat in my hand, sitting in my office, waiting for him to come in. And one of my text messages is from Charlie Minoso, Charlie Rice Minoso, who's Minnie's son. He said, "I hope you're okay, and I hope everybody in the office is okay. I'm concerned about you. I want you to know, my dad will be thinking about you." I said, "I got your dad's bat in my hand." And he said, "If he was there, he'd be swinging it." I said, "You're damn right he would." Well, we stayed there, and I watched the tube, and then we got up and went and voted. And that was a great day that we voted. Speaker Pelosi was heroic in getting us called back, and Mike Pence was heroic in not succumbing to President Trump's dictations that he changed the law and the rules and count the votes differently. All of the public officers were great. Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police here, National Guardsmen and others, great heroes. And I value all of them, and they protect us every day, and they don't get the respect that they should and the regard. But I think the greatest hero of all is Jack Smith. Jack Smith is like Mr. Stewart Goes to Washington. He is a lawyer who is a lawyer's lawyer. And he found in his work that there was an indictable offense, and he indicted the president for what he did. That needed to happen. He was only stopped because of the Justice Department's rule that you can't prosecute a sitting president. It was not dropped. It was because Trump won the election. But Jack Smith pursued it all the way through. And he is, in my opinion, he testified before a Republican committee that was set up to try to get him in a trap so they could prosecute him for something they could create. Their vindictive tour needs to stop, but it's still going on, a vendetta. Jack Smith stood firm. He spoke truth, even though he knew that if he said anything at all that they could possibly conjure up in another manner, he would be indicted, and they'd probably take his bar license away and try to put him in jail. He said he followed the facts and then applied it to the law. In his recent deposition, he told the Judiciary Committee, "The decision to bring charges against President Trump was mine, but the basis for those charges rests entirely with President Trump and his actions, as alleged in the indictments returned by the grand jury in 2 different districts. Our investigation developed and proved beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results of the 2020 election and to prevent the lawful transfer of power." That was heroic actions by him. President Trump is a treasonous individual, and it's awful that he's still in the White House and destroyed the East Wing, and as Mr. Raskin quite said, had graffiti put up over John Kennedy's name at the Kennedy Center. One date, somebody mentioned, dates will always remember it, and a September date, January date, and Pearl Harbor. We'll never forget November 22, 1963, of those of us who are alive. I remember it all the time. Whenever I think about it, I start to tear up. I'm about to tear up now. And the idea that he put his name over John Kennedy's should never be forgotten, and he should be wiped out. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to Leader Jeffries and all of the other leaders who have made sure that we commemorate this day appropriately with this hearing. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and the United States Capitol has been a building permanently etched in my mind from an early age. It regularly came into my view as daily life took my family and I around the District of Columbia. To me, the Capitol was always a citadel, a beacon of freedom, democracy, and justice. At the age of 10, I developed the vision that one day I would serve there as a legislator. I was always so proud. Even today, I'm still in awe of the United States Capitol, what it stands for, and the fact that it has been my workplace for the last 19 years. On January 6, 2021, amidst social distancing in response to the COVID pandemic, then still ongoing, I was so proud to be one of a limited number of members of the House to be in the chamber to witness the certification of the 2020 elections. Though somewhat envious of those who were seated on the floor, I nonetheless savored the honor of having a seat in the House gallery from which I could observe this solemn proceeding. As the peaceful transfer of power was taking place in the chamber, the proceedings were rudely, then violently interrupted. The disorder became louder and louder as the insurrectionists got nearer and nearer. The cacophony shut down the speaker and caused the business of the House to stop. From the gallery, I watched as the speaker was extracted from the chair and my colleagues evacuated from the floor. What would happen to us in the gallery, I thought. The situation became scary, dire, and dangerous. I felt like a sitting duck. In those moments, while in self-preservation mode, I thought of jumping from the gallery onto the House floor so that I could be evacuated. My thoughts then turned to my colleagues also in the gallery, and my thoughts turned to my moral responsibility to them. I would never leave them to save myself. As we were being spirited out of the chamber into the hallway, I saw dozens of violent insurrectionists lying spread-eagled on the marble floor under the gunpoint of Capitol Hill police. I later learned that all of those insurrectionists had been released without charges because there were not enough law enforcement manpower to take them into custody. They all walked. They came into the U.S. Capitol, disrupted our work, and desecrated this citadel of democracy, and they all walked. Needless to say, I was gratified later when more than 1,500 perpetrators were prosecuted, some of the worst offenders receiving 20-year sentences. There was a sense that people had been held accountable for their crimes. Then on January 20th, 2025, Donald J. Trump shot Lady Justice on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight by pardoning each and every January 6th insurrectionist. It was a blow to justice and the rule of law in America. And my sense of anger at injustice has intensified as Donald Trump and his lapdog Republicans in Congress do everything in their power in an unholy and futile attempt to whitewash and rewrite the history of what happened on January 6th. While Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans continue their systematic assault on truth and justice, I will proudly stand in the breach with House Democrats and all people of goodwill to defend the concepts of truth, freedom, liberty, and justice for all, which is American democracy. And I'd like to thank the Capitol Hill police officers and the Metropolitan Police Department officers who defended us on that fateful day, and thank you, Speaker Emerita Pelosi, for your leadership during those troubled times. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. We've been joined by another member of the panel, young lady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon, who is not necessarily one person in this situation, but we're trying to move forward, and we thank Ms. Torres for giving up her seat so you can join us. Ms. Scanlon, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for arranging this hearing. I started January 6th, along with Congresswoman Dean, in a meeting with Democratic members of Congress from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was key to President Trump's effort to overturn the 2020 election. He and his allies had spread lies and conspiracy theories about the votes in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, but those claims were universally debunked and disproven and rejected in over 60 different cases, although a third of them were in Pennsylvania. That didn't stop his big lie. It just grew bigger. culminating in the violent attack on this building on January 6th. My colleagues and I that morning knew we'd have to defend Pennsylvania's votes, including from our Republican colleagues who'd just been sworn in on the very same ballots they were now challenging. But we had no idea that a violent mob would interrupt Congress's vote count, turning this building into a war zone. I never expected to have to barricade the doors to my office or to see the Vice President, members of Congress, and staff fleeing for their lives, to see hundreds of injured police officers, some losing their lives and their livelihoods in the aftermath. Those officers are our guardians, but also our friends. There's one young officer who I still can't see without tearing up because I didn't see him for weeks after January 6th, and I was afraid he'd been grievously injured. So I do still embarrass him by crying on his shoulder. But most of all, I never expected that 5 years later, the lies that led to that tragic day would continue. While members of the president's own party begged for his help that day and condemned his actions for a few days afterwards, they quickly knuckled under and joined his effort to erase or rewrite history. The handful of Republicans who put loyalty to country over party at that time have been driven from that party, and those remaining have encouraged his pernicious lies to fester. In his second term, Trump has elevated his allies and pardoned those who attacked the police in this building on his behalf, and he's attacked the truth tellers. Just last month, the House Judiciary Committee refused to allow Special Counsel Jack Smith to testify publicly about the mountain of evidence he's compiled that proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump had tried to overturn the 2020 election, once again trying to slam the door on the truth. Everyone should read or watch Jack Smith's testimony. Look, our country was built on shared truths. The Declaration of Independence opens with truths that we hold to be self-evident. And our Constitution strives to form a more perfect union grounded in the common good. But this president and his allies have rejected that sturdy foundation of shared facts and values. Instead, they've built a house of cards on lies and greed and the pursuit of power. But houses without a secure foundation cannot endure. The truth matters. Those who deny the horrific violence and lawlessness that inspired the January 6th attack on the Capitol want the American people to forget. They don't want you to question their house of cards or hold them accountable. But we must remember, ever since January 6th, our Republican colleagues have said it's time to move on so the country can unite. We need the country to unite, but to unite in respect for the truth and love of country. To unite in holding accountable those who would lie and undermine our Constitution, because we've seen the consequences of the failure to do so. There can be no unity or accountability without a shared truth based on facts. So today, we remember and thank you for this opportunity. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Let me thank the witnesses for that testimony. I'd like to now excuse that witness and bring on our next panel of witnesses. We'll pause for the changeover.
All right, so the midst of a changeover at that January 6th committee hearing, as we learned from their last changeover, they will begin speaking once again. But, you know, the gentleman before the most recent speaker, you saw how emotional he was getting during his testimony. And then, of course, the woman who followed, also emotional. Whether these, you know, a lot of these are firsthand testimonies of people who were in D.C., in the Capitol building, as rioters were breaking into the building. And it certainly seems like it was a terrifying situation for those involved. Based on those testimonies that we have just heard, to be in the building when a sizable mob approaches the building and begins breaking into the United States Capitol, it certainly sounds, from hearing these firsthand testimonies, you get a sense of how frightening that actually is. And you are quickly taken back to that day, and you remember some of the images, some of the video, and now some of the testimonies from those who were there on that day when that insurrection occurred. The insurrection occurred, of course, in the midst of the Stop the Steal movement by President Donald Trump in regards to the 2020 election, asserting that President Biden had stolen the election, as President Biden had won the election. President Trump pressuring Vice President Mike Pence to block the ratification of the election results. Vice President Mike Pence did not do so. Vice President Pence became a target of the mob that was conducting the insurrection at the Capitol on that day. So it was, it takes you back to that day. You start to remember some of the order of operations, the things that happened, the images, the video, the reporting, all around what was a truly, for lack of a better word, a headline-making day in America in ways that we haven't seen in this country in some time. So it was an anniversary that will come around every year now on January 6th. This is officially one of those days that each year annually will draw attention and will draw recollections and reflection on that event on January 6th. Now, that committee is now ongoing. It has started up again. I want to take a break sort of in the midst of our reporting to I'm going to kind of freely talk with the People's producer, Nia Campbell here. Nia, we've got a couple things going on. We have a very special interview coming up that's going to be starting very soon. We do have that committee hearing still going on. We're also going to be joined by Evan Stewart here momentarily to be a part of the interview that we're going to do. Sit tight. We will be introducing our guest before long. I want to ask Nia, where do we go now? Should we go back to the committee hearing just briefly while we prepare for the interview that's upcoming? Should we talk to Evan a bit about the forecast while we wait? Or is there another event that you think deserves our attention at this moment?
We can go back to the committee just so we can prepare and set our mics and everything.
Okay. We are going to go back to that committee hearing. We're going to listen in once again to testimony from members of the January 6th committee, many of whom were there on that day, while we prepare for a very special interview that's coming up that will involve a special guest as well as meteorologist Evan Stewart. We'll be right back here in Live Impact. Let's go live out to D.C. once again.
Officials who pushed for accountability after January 6th.
Multiple capital injury.
It's a key tool in Donald Trump's retaliation campaign. In the last year, the Department of Justice and Donald Trump have pressured FBI leadership to hand over lists of staff who worked on January 6 prosecutions.
For that to suddenly be coming from inside the Department of Justice, for this extraordinary example of political violence to be normalized and legitimated, that was what was most shocking to me.
Trump fired senior FBI officials who didn't cooperate, purged dozens more prosecutors who worked on January 6 cases, and pardoned hundreds of rioters who continue to seek their own retribution.
The people who did this, they need to feel the heat. They need to be put behind bars, and they need to be prosecuted.
For the people who bravely defended the rule of law on and after January 6, the political violence continues.
These political firings, I believe, have the purpose and effect of empowering vigilantes and militias that are loyal to the president, but ultimately unaccountable to the law.
Because their fellow rioters now have political appointments at the Department of Justice, they believe violence in service to Trump is above the law.
We should all be terrified. Since January 6th, Donald Trump has only intensified his attacks on America's fundamental democratic institutions. He has weaponized our justice system to reward his allies and punish his enemies. He's pursued policies that prioritize the interests of his wealthy friends over the needs of working people. And he has flouted the system of checks and balances that has been the bedrock of our nation for nearly 250 years. But at a time when it feels our democracy is in peril, Americans of all stripes are coming together to preserve our great experiment. There is an ever-growing coalition of people who are willing to put patriotism above allegiance to any person or party, who share a fundamental commitment to an America by and for the people, where no one is above the law. That's why I'm honored today to introduce three witnesses who have been center to those efforts. Jeff Duncan served in the Georgia House of Representatives from 2013 to 2017, and then as the state's lieutenant governor from 2019 to 2023. As lieutenant governor, Mr. Duncan was instrumental in resisting Trump's pressure campaign to overturn the results of the 2020 election in Georgia. He rebuffed Trump's bogus calls to find 11,780 votes and refused to convene the special legislative session to facilitate Trump's illegal fake elector scheme. Because of his continued refusal to bend the knee to Donald Trump, he was expelled from the Georgia Republican Party. We're also joined by Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul. A Chicago native, Attorney General Raoul served in the Illinois State Senate for 14 years before becoming state's Attorney General in 2019. Mr. Raoul has repeatedly and successfully taken the Trump administration to court to combat its unlawful actions, including its efforts to deploy the National Guard in Chicago. Our third and final witness is Skye Perryman. Ms. Perryman is the president and CEO of Democracy Forward, a nonpartisan legal organization dedicated to defending our democracy. Under her leadership, Democracy Forward has led hundreds of legal challenges designed to expand reproductive rights, combat corruption, protect workers, and safeguard Americans' civil liberties. Welcome to our witnesses. Lastly, I'd like to take a moment to note that January 6th isn't the only anniversary of political violence we remember this week. 15 years ago this Thursday, a gunman.
Okay, back here in the Live Impact News studio, where we actually have a very special segment here that is going to be weather-driven, but not exactly a forecast. Dr. Matthew Barlow joins us from UMass Lowell. Dr. Barlow is a climate scientist, and then also meteorologist Evan Stewart is here with us today. First of all, Dr. Barlow, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm doing fine. Thanks very much for having me.
Awesome. And Dr. Barlow will be here mostly to talk nor'easters with us, one of the weather phenomenon that we certainly experience in our viewing area here in Hampton Roads. And I guess, now, Evan, this is our first time kind of conducting an interview together. I almost want to let you take the reins. I'm happy to have you kind of take the reins, and I'll jump in where I can.
Okay, well, Dr. Barlow, first, thank you for joining us. And, I'm sure you're familiar with coastal Virginia and North Carolina. We're no strangers to nor'easters here. A lot of folks think about hurricanes, but looking back over 10 of our highest tides, 5 of them have been from nor'easters. Yeah, they can be very high-impact storms at the coast in terms of storm surge. They also tend to move a little slower, as you know, than tropical cyclones. So they have a little longer time to increase the chance that they overlap with high tide. And there's been a lot of research and a lot of talk over the last few years about the warm waters of the Atlantic, the changing climate, supercharging hurricanes and maybe causing rapid intensification. But you've been investigating and studying how it's been impacting nor'easters. Yes, and I think it's a little more straightforward for hurricanes because the warm ocean temperatures are such a direct part of the energy that drives the storm. But they are, of course, very important for nor'easters as well in terms of evaporating the water that then falls down as there intense rain or snow, usually further to the north than your area. But as the atmosphere warms, it can hold more water, so you get more evaporation off of the warm coastal ocean. Leads to more rainfall. More rainfall releases more heat into the atmosphere and helps these storms get stronger with more intense rain and heavier winds. Right. We often talk about
as you mentioned, that hurricanes are warm core systems, nor'easters are cold core systems, and they form in totally different ways. And, it's really that, the confluence of the very warm air and the cold air that fuels these low pressure centers that develop into these coastal storms, these nor'easters. And have we seen that trend with other non-tropical lows, our mid-Atlantic cyclones that come across and then eventually develop into our nor'easters?
Yeah, so I think the complexity here is that climate change has multiple impacts on this type of storm. So some of them are pushing them to be a little weaker, and some of them, the factors are pushing them to be stronger. So as you say, the mechanism, the engine that drives these storms is temperature contrast. And over land, as things warm, that temperature contrast gets less because the Arctic warms faster than the rest of the world. So you're reducing temperature contrast a little bit over land. So which would lead you to expect that to be a weakening factor for these storms. But you also have the temperature contrast between the cold East Coast during winter and those very, very warm waters. And that's increased with global warming. And then on top of that, you have the increased heating from all the rainfall, the more intense rainfall. So the way it seems to be shaking out is that the average storm, we don't see a large signal in the average intensity or frequency of these storms, but the biggest storms, the strongest storms, do seem to be getting stronger. We've already observed an increase in the intensity of the strongest storms. So there's a bit of a difference between what's going on in the average and what's going on in the most intense storms, where they do seem to be getting more intense.
Can I jump in real quick, Evan?
Sure.
So we see that in those storms, the higher end is more intense. It's not necessarily the average that is more intense. I'm wondering if if there's been a difference in the frequency of nor'easters that we've seen, especially in our area.
I would say that that's not fully settled yet. The nor'easters are relatively infrequent. So you need a pretty large change pretty quickly to be confident that things have changed. So I would say that our current understanding suggests not a large change yet in the frequency, more in the upper limit.
Right. I think that's somewhat similar to what we're seeing in the hurricanes as well, is that, the average storms are not really changing, but the supercharged storms are becoming more supercharged. So what got you interested in this area of climate science and meteorology?
Well, I'm interested in extreme events, what causes heavy rainfall, heavy snow, what do changes in the water cycle look like? And nor'easters are a big player in precipitation, in rainfall and snowfall outside the tropics. They're the sort of main precipitation factor. And then also, these are the type of storms that give us some of our biggest impacts in terms of infrastructure damage, transportation issues. And so these are really, really high impact storms. From both those perspectives, very important to understand.
Right, because our area here in the Mid-Atlantic, we get both. We get the hurricanes and the nor'easters. Usually they're not as strong as those nor'easters that you get in the Northeast.
Yeah, so we get sort of the full version, I guess, of the nor'easter, and they are very important for the heaviest snowfalls that we get, although tropical cyclones and hurricanes are still pretty important for our precipitation as well. So a lot of similarity between the two regions, I think.
Right, and as we look back now, we're 14 years out of Superstorm Sandy, sort of that hybrid situation. Looking back now, how do we think that the changing climate impacted, say, a storm like Sandy, or even the perfect storm, which I know that was quite a ways, or quite a while ago. but certainly different than what we saw with like our Ash Wednesday storm in the 1960s.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. One take on that is what would those storms look like if they happen now? And I think that they would be more intense and cause even more damage than they did in a warmer climate. The rainfall rates would probably be higher. We know that sea level is also rising along the coast, which makes coastal flooding easier. So I think that any of those historical storms, if they happen again, and really it's a question of when the next big storm is going to happen. I think when that next big storm happens, it's going to be even more intense than what we've seen previously. And I think people do have a little bit of a tendency to forget exactly how much damage these storms can really cause, especially along the coast.
Right, and I think something that is difficult for us as the local meteorologists to explain to viewers when we say, oh, well, with Superstorm Sandy, our tide level hit 6.81, or the Ash Wednesday storm, it hit a different level, but that's when the base level was a lot lower. Now we've got, several inches on top of that, so a similar storm would have higher tides because our baseline is higher.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think the local meteorologists are doing the hero's work here in terms of communicating to the public. But I think that is a challenge, that how things have happened in the past are not that great a prediction of how things are going to happen in the future. They're changing underneath us.
Right, and it's always evolving, always changing. So, Connor, I'll let you,
Yeah,
I'm the meteorologist. And I look at it differently than, say, a viewer looks at it. So what would be your big question?
And that will become very clear once I start asking questions. I feel like I'm getting to watch, Nick Saban and Bill Belichick talk X's and O's here. I guess I would ask, when it comes to the conditions for a nor'easter, we've obviously touched on how that differs from a hurricane and from other storms. I'm wondering, when it comes to the impacts of a nor'easter, are there specific characteristics that are much different from hurricanes, the impacts of those storms?
That's a good question, which is why I'm taking a second to take it in. So in terms of impacts, the nor'easters tend to be bigger overall, so they impact a larger region, a larger area than most, but not all, hurricanes. They also can move a little more slowly and interact more with more high tides, causing more coastal flooding. So they have a lot of the same impacts aside from snow, which of course is more of a nor'easter thing where we are here in Massachusetts than in your neck of the woods. But a lot of the same impacts, but different in scope and a little bit in terms of predictability as well.
And I would just, say, like you said, the core of a hurricane has the strongest winds, but in a nor'easter, those winds are more spread out and impact a lot more people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Barlow, this was really great. It was wonderful to get to talk to you. It was awesome to kind of see the two of you guys get to talk. This is a unique thing for us here on Live Impact News. We really appreciate you joining us. We've reached kind of the end of our time. Is there anything you want to add that maybe we didn't ask that you think is important to express?
I think the only thing I would say quickly is a great thing for people to do is simply to talk with their community about what's important to them. If you're concerned about climate change, probably your neighbors are too, but they may not know that it's a joint concern. So I would encourage people to talk about the weather and climate impacts with their neighbors and family and friends and community.
That was great advice. I feel like we got to do a facsimile of that here today on Live Impact News. Dr. Barlow, we really appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully we can have you on again in the future.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Awesome. That is Dr. Matthew Barlow from UMass Lowell joining us to talk about nor'easters. Did you have one last word? I know we let Dr. Barlow go. Evan, did you have anything to add?
No, just that, again, I wanted to point out that, some of our biggest most impactful storms, we always think of hurricanes, but, my father remembers the Ash Wednesday storm in 1962. I mean, he was a kid then, but he remembers how impactful it was, and it did more damage than most hurricanes that we've had, outside of maybe Isabel and the 1933 hurricane.
And we think about, when we approach things, there's hurricane season, and it's something we're constantly monitoring, and rightfully so. But maybe nor'easters don't get the pub that hurricanes do, but as you said, they can have just as many impacts and just as devastating of effects as other major natural disasters. Now, this is pure entrapment. I can't label it any other way. We've already got you in the seat.
Right.
Can we do a very brief forecast for the week here? If you need to open up the laptop and stuff, I can take some time for you.
Yeah, I don't have any graphics loaded up, but I can give you just a quick little preview. Right now we're sitting at around 62 degrees. We'll be up into the mid-60s this afternoon, mostly cloudy. As we get into tonight, we'll be in the 40s. Tomorrow, we'll be up into the upper 60s. Lots of sunshine. If you're like me and your New Year's resolution is to get rid of some of that eggnog and fruitcake, some great weather to get out and, take a walk. A little cooler on Thursday. We'll be back into the 70s on Friday. Of course, it all comes crashing down this weekend. We've got rain on Saturday and falling temperatures into early next week.
Rain on Saturday, but warm on Saturday.
Yes, rain on Saturday and warm. And looks like the system is going to be a little slower, so that rain will probably linger into Sunday. And the temperatures will gradually drop from the 70s on Saturday to the 50s on Sunday to the 40s on Monday.
Okay, lovely. So do make sure to enjoy the rest of this week. Rain coming up, and then more cold as we are still sort of in early January here. Evan, thank you for a good forecast as always, and thank you especially for hanging out with us for that interview.
Oh, my pleasure.
We will see Evan Stewart on 4 p.m. today. 4 p.m., 13 News Now?
Yep, 4 p.m. and at 6:30.
That's right.
On the special extended edition of 13 News Now at 6.
This trio right here, myself, Evan Stewart, and Nia Campbell, responsible for the 6:30 broadcast. It's a little bit different, more locally focused. Join us on 13 News Now Plus if you happen to miss some of our other broadcasts, or if you just want a little bit more 13 News Now. Evan, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Okay, back here in the Live Impact studio, we got to take a little break here, but we're going to go back to those dueling anniversaries that we're talking about, or not dueling anniversaries, one anniversary, the anniversary of January 6th. But there's an interesting dichotomy in terms of our live feeds here. On one live feed, we have the Proud Boys who planned a retracing of the steps of the original insurrection march to the Capitol. George Washington University.edu describes the Proud Boys as a far-right neo-fascist organization founded in 2016. That is on GWU.edu. That is their definition, and the Proud Boys holding that march. Now, that is the footage that you see right there. We want to make sure that we are careful with this footage. They came in contact with police officers earlier. There appeared to be some lewd gestures from what we could make out. We're not entirely sure what's happening in this particular shot. It looks like perhaps marchers have encountered another group of people, but again, we don't know for sure. But they are on that march retracing those steps. Now, that is the juxtaposition of that is what's happening at the January 6th committee hearing that they are holding right now in Washington, D.C., where we have heard a number of elected leaders, elected officials who were there on January 6th giving emotional, tearful testimony about the events of that day, particularly how frightening they were, how devastating it was, talking about injuries to police officers on that day, talking about trying to barricade doors in the Capitol building to ensure the safety of the elected officials who were there that day. So it's an interesting dichotomy that we're monitoring right now regarding the anniversary of the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol building. We're going to go back out live to the Select Committee special hearing from that January 6th committee. We're going to listen in on that for a while, and then as we told you, we will be getting to comments from President Donald Trump. He spoke at length this morning about a number of different topics. We did record that particular speech, and we will be going to that at some point. But for now, let's go back out live to D.C. at the January 6th special committee hearing.
a lot of work to check the president's excesses, to protect the American people and our right to vote and our right to elections. And people across this country are going to have to continue to keep showing up. And we will, in communities and courts across the country. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much for your enlightening testimony from our witnesses. In my opening statement, I said one of the lessons from January 6th Select Committee was that our institutions withstood President Trump's coordinated attack because Republicans put country over party. They put their oath to the Constitution above loyalty to one man. Lieutenant Governor Duncan is one example of that type of political courage. I'd like to ask this panel what each of you think Republicans should do when they see what is coming out of the current administration, and where should the Republican Party go after Trump to help restore American democratic institutions? Lieutenant Governor.
Well, thank you for the question. I made the decision to leave the party altogether and to move on to a better place to call home, a better place to meet the needs of Georgians. Like I said in my statements, it gives me a much better toolkit every morning when I wake up to not drive by that hospital and see a scared family because they don't have health insurance walking in there knowing they're going to bankrupt their family, or driving by that school and having to blame the teachers, or trying to justify anything that Donald Trump does. I think that Republicans are in the midst of a crisis right now, a crisis of epic proportion. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene's leaving, as it appears. But they're in a crisis because nobody can explain Donald Trump. Nobody wants to explain Donald Trump. Nothing makes sense. And so for me, I think we need to wake up and want to solve problems. I'll say this. The job of president has the least effect on any of our lives, average Americans. Right? They don't determine the president doesn't determine what your kids learn in school right away, or how much traffic you sit in, or how safe your neighborhood is. But the president sets the tempo for the country. And this country is desperate for a role model, for somebody who gets up every day, slightly left, slightly right, you pick it. But somebody who's a role model, who's respectable and honest, and sets an example for kids and college kids and students and entrepreneurs and retirees and military officials. Sets the example for everybody. That's what this country's in desperate need of. Donald Trump's not that example.
Mr. Attorney General, you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, Mr. Chairman, there are some matters that I do collaborate with my Republican counterparts on consumer protection and other matters. However, this area of executive overreach is one that I would hope that I would wish that they would partner with us, but they have not, because the traditional values that Republicans have advocated for, state sovereignty, the 10th Amendment used to be their thing, but they've been silent. The cases that we've filed, those to preserve education funding, have not been cases filed just that impact blue states, but they impact red states as well. The Congress, you all have put conditions on making sure that critical cancer research, Alzheimer research at NIH is appropriately funded. This does not only impact research institutions in blue states, but it also impacts research institutions in red states. And so we have 23 Democratic attorney generals stepping up to the plate when in fact it should be all state attorney generals stepping up to the plate to protect the citizens of all 50 states from the executive overreach that we've seen from this administration.
Thank you so much. Ms. Perriman.
I think the president and his allies in this Congress and the Republican Party need to understand that people are watching and that history is watching. And the Republican members of this body, as well as any member of this body, has to understand in this moment that this is a moment where history will look back to see. Is the Republican Party going to sit idly by while this democracy completely backslides into an autocracy? Or is it going to be part of the turnaround? There should be no room in this body or any body across the United States for elected representatives that will not defend the right to vote, that will not decry violence, that will not defend free and fair elections, and yet we have a president and his allies that are trying to use the machinery of the federal government to undermine free and fair elections and to undermine people's basic constitutional rights, literally disappearing people. Right now at Democracy Forward, we have attorneys that are in courtrooms across this country arguing right now to try to have to preserve programs that are keeping infant mortality rates down and programs for pediatricians and doctors and public education, let alone rights that everyone in this country has to due process and to civil rights. And so I think that this is really that moment, and we need everyone to step up to the plate, and there should just be these non-negotiables. I would encourage anyone listening, including any Republicans that may be listening, to go to weholdtruths.org, which is the 5 non-negotiable principles around American democracy. Ranking Member Raskin has already signed on to the pledge, and really do some soul searching and determined to be part of the solution, as opposed to continuing to aid and abet an administration that is on a collision course with the U.S. Constitution and that is operating harmfully to the American people.
Thank you so much. We recognize our members for 3 minutes. Our first person will be from Illinois, Mr. Garcia, for 3 minutes.
Thanks again, Mr. Chairman. Today's hearing shines a spotlight on a dark chapter in our country's history where an outgoing president sought to overturn a democratic election. Trump's insurrection was not a random act, nor was pardoning the rioters on his first day in office. Instead, he was deploying the playbook of chaos and lawlessness that's at the heart of the MAGA movement. Let's take one example, the abuse of military power. Despite pleas from local officials and law enforcement, Trump refused to deploy the National Guard on January 6, 5 years ago, during a literal rebellion against the federal government. He got away with that. So in his second term, he's tried to illegally invade our cities, including Chicago, with the National Guard under wildly false pretenses, as Attorney General Raul described in his remarks. And Trump is not stopping there. He's abused military power to invade our cities, and now he's abusing military power to attack a foreign country, kidnap its leader, and steal its resources for the benefit of big oil companies. It's a shakedown. This is not a coincidence. This is the defining feature of Donald Trump and his political movement. They want a gangster state where violence, corruption, and abuse of power are the norm, not the exception. And the only way we'll stop them, the only antidote to impunity, is accountability. Attorney General Raul, can you speak to your office's work on stopping the illegal National Guard deployment in Illinois? You made reference to it already, and the lessons that we can learn about the role of states in holding the federal government accountable for its lawless actions?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. In doing so, I want to thank you all, Congress, for filing an amicus brief in the case where you all spoke to the extremity of what the federal government was asking for. What the federal government was asking for, and essentially in that case, was to ignore Congress and Congress's power given through the militia clauses, to ignore the courts. They basically argued that the president has discretion that's not reviewable by even the courts to deploy the military onto the streets of American cities. I can't overstate how extreme that position, how frightening that position and that argument is. And that's why we took to action, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court denied their motion to stay.
And what should Congress take away from that?
that you should continue to assert your power as Congress. One consistent theme throughout the 48 cases that I mentioned is the administration ignoring what we learned in Schoolhouse Rock, that we have separations of powers and that Congress has been given the authority to appropriate, and Congress has been given the authority to set guidelines for the executive branch to carry out.
Thank you. Appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the witnesses. Lieutenant Governor Duncan, you were one of the people being told by Donald Trump, just find me 11,780 votes. That's all I need, right? And he thought it was just a matter of party loyalty. It would be obvious because at that point you were Republican, right? But you didn't think it was a question of party loyalty. You thought it was just a question of where were the votes, counting the actual votes of the people, right? You were one of numerous election officials around the country who refused to buckle under when Trump did that. That wasn't Donald Trump trying to stop election fraud. That was Donald Trump trying to commit election fraud. I wonder if you would give us a little more insight into what your thought process was, and also what do you think would have happened had you given in and other election officials given in at that point?
Thank you for the question. I think that's the important part to hang on is how, I don't think most Americans recognize or realize how close we were to breaking the back of democracy. I mean, if just a handful of us that had early on were very out front with this, saying, look, there's no election fraud, and then all of a sudden we would have checked the brakes at some point and walked up to a microphone and said, you know what, I now do have concerns. The momentum would have shifted and we would have seen chaos. The moves made by Donald Trump and those around him, kind of his MAGA disciples and his administration, were very granular, researched moves, right? They understood the mechanics of what a special session could do, but also they didn't understand the legalities or the constitutionality of why we would have a special session. We would do that to take care of the needs of Georgians, not to investigate some sort of conspiracy theory. I think it's most often when, even to this day, more than 5 years removed, a lot of Republicans walk up to me and they put their arm around me and they look both ways to make sure there's no microphones or cameras, and they'll say, hey, I appreciate you standing up for the right thing. I wish one day I could do it too. And I have two choices. I can either get mad and scream and holler at them and lose my mind in the moment, or I can play the long game and hope they wake up. And I think Republicans as a mass are starting to wake up one by one by one and creating this new way forward.
So when all that failed, then Trump went to Mike Pence, to his own vice president, and he tried to get him to exercise imaginary powers to nullify electoral college votes on the floor of the House, including Georgia's. At that point, he basically just said, discredit these results and we've got you a slate of counterfeit electors. Use those instead. Do people in Georgia understand that this was not only violence, but this was a massive assault on voting rights? It was an attempt to steal the voice of the people of Georgia in the election.
I think some do, but not all. It's unfortunate. That's part of the frustrating process that all of these pardons have come out. The gentleman I spoke about, Burt Jones, who is his chief cheerleader and is now the current lieutenant governor, was just recently pardoned. He was the ringleader of the fake electors group and this effort to create a special session. It was a very granular effort, as I mentioned earlier. And it's unfortunate. And in America, Americans are paying the price. As I said in my testimony, Americans day by day, if you're waking up and can't afford your groceries, that's a problem.
Yeah. Final question for the other two witnesses. But both of you are on the front lines of defending our freedom, defending our democracy in court. And we're winning overwhelmingly in the federal district courts and in the federal appeals courts. And people have to understand the rule of law is holding there. The big problem is we get up to the Roberts Court's emergency docket, the shadow docket, and it's like the twilight zone for justice there. Tell us how you are maintaining hope and faith through this process, and what you're telling people about still the persisting fundamental importance of defending rights in court and treating our federal judiciary with the respect that it's traditionally deserved.
Well, Congressman, I draw some hope from Illinois v. Trump in the Supreme Court case that I've been referring to for a couple of reasons. Although the court did not address the issue of reviewability, which I thought it should, because this notion that the president has this authority to deploy the military and the courts don't have authority to review it is a very extreme notion. But one of the things that I think that many missed is footnote 4 in the case, which is Justice Kavanaugh taking a step backwards from his prior position that, in essence, race can be used as a notion for immigration stops, and that he took the time in that footnote to explicitly take a step back gives me a sense of hope.
The ability of the American people to initiate litigation against their government, as you know, Ranking Member Raskin, is an incredible right and power that people have. And what we see in court after court is it's not just the court decisions, and we are winning in the vast majority of these cases because the president's policies are so extreme. But it's not just the court decisions. It's individual Americans stepping up to the plate and saying, I'm going to require a public accounting of what my government is doing to me because I have rights. And what we have seen is that this administration in many instances.
Okay, that we have spent some time with that January 6th committee hearing, which we should, because it is January 6th. It is the 5th anniversary of the insurrection at the Capitol. But the majority leader of the United States Senate, John Thune, has just taken the podium also at the United States Capitol. Let's listen in live to Majority Leader Thune's comments now.
A healthy majority, I would think, one, you would have to have reforms. So you'd have to deal with the income limits. You'd have to deal with the $0 premium issue and make sure that everybody at least is paying something for coverage so that the insurance companies can't game it and auto-enroll people and then have the money flow directly to them. And then the third, the second component would be some sort of a bridge to HSAs, an expansion of HSAs so that you're getting more money into the pockets of the American people, the patients, if you will, the consumers, as opposed to the insurance companies. And then finally, you've got to deal with the height issue. I mean, those, I think, are the kind of the big three when it comes to something that could get through the Senate. And I know there are discussions going on right now with some of our members. We'll see where that goes. Ultimately, we want to ensure that if we do anything, it's done in a way that reforms these programs and protects ensures that those dollars aren't being used to go against the practice that's been in place for the last 50 years around here when it comes to taxpayer dollars being used to finance abortions, and that it also has this movement in the future toward HSAs and more utilization of those. Well, first, on Venezuela, my view is that the Venezuela energy industry, which is in cahoots with China and Russia, is now going to need to start working constructively with the United States and with energy companies here. And what will happen if that actually takes place is that you will start seeing the people of Venezuela benefit from the energy industry instead of having the folks that they're in league with in China and Russia. So my view is that it's not going to be a cost to the American taxpayer. This ought to be revenue coming into this country if we're working in a way with Venezuela, and hopefully that an energy supply, a commodity that can benefit the Venezuelan people, which is something that I think they should derive some benefit from. And right now, their leadership, because they are corrupt and in bed with narco-terrorists and in bed with China and Russia, the people in that country are now seeing the benefit of something that they've got, an energy resource in this country that ought to be to their benefit. And again, I would just say, with respect to, we all here support 100% Capitol Police and the job that they do around here on a daily basis. Thank you.
Okay, so brief comments from Senate Majority Leader Thune. He spoke about health care. Of course, those enhanced subsidies for the Affordable Care Act expired at that end of December deadline. So the health care crisis still being worked out in Congress. He also mentioned support for the Capitol Police on this anniversary of January 6th that we are currently in, the 5th anniversary of January 6th. It is January 6th, 2026. January 6, 2021, the day of the insurrection at the Capitol, the 5th anniversary on this Tuesday in the year 2026. You saw me there take a moment to just grapple with the passage of time almost. At once it seems so far away, but also not that long ago, all at the same time almost. You caught me in an existential moment there on the middle of our live Impact News. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to stick with our live events. We've got attorneys giving an update in the death of a Texas A&M student. This has been a case that we've been following in and out for some time, and now attorneys are live speaking about the death of that student and the circumstances surrounding that death. Let's go live out to that press conference here for the time being. We'll meet back in here in Live Impact News. I haven't forgotten that we have been mentioning how President Trump had extensive comments earlier today on a number of different topics. We still plan on getting to those comments. For now, let's stay with our live events. Let's head out to this press conference about the death of that Texas A&M student.
We won't see an autopsy for months in the future. Once we had our press conference, you recall that they released a statement. They quickly walked back their hasty conclusion and said, oh, no, our investigation is very much open, and we have not concluded anything. Just literally completely 180-degree difference from what they had said previously. So you would think, okay, if your investigation's open, what witnesses have you spoken to since you gave your press conference? Well, they certainly haven't spoken to one of the most key witnesses, or her mother, or her father, or other people in that building, other people on the apartments adjacent or across the hall. I think we can all agree if there was an argument going on right around 12:45 that night, pacing and screaming and hollering, that's a lot different than claiming that we didn't know where this girl was because we were all asleep. They've never explained to us why the owner of that apartment, the lessee of that apartment, decided to vacate it immediately the very next day. That's never been explained to us. They've never explained to us if they've ever actually asked the three individuals in the apartment or the boyfriend for the telephone so they could look at the texts. The good news is I have some of those texts, and those texts do not match up with this timeline. They don't match up. The point is, this requires more investigation. I will tell you one thing the police department from Austin did do after the press conference. They contacted us. They asked us, hey, would you give us your witnesses? That's what they did. Is that how you expect your police department to operate? And I'll tell you what else they did. And this is probably most concerning. They told all of the witnesses not to talk to us. They told the three individuals that were in that apartment that night when this young girl died, they told them, do not speak to Breonna's mother or her lawyers. Now, why would they do that? What possible reason could there be for the police department in Austin to instruct people that were with Breonna at or around the time she died to not speak to Breonna's mother? You know, one of our investigators who's been doing this for 57 years commented to me, he says, Tony, I've never seen a group of witnesses so tight-lipped and refusing to talk to us. If there's no foul play, why would there be a reason not to speak to us? If the police have already decided that this was a suicide, why would the police also tell the witnesses, do not speak to Breonna's mother and do not speak to her lawyers? We've had many people reach out to us. Many have the same story about the Austin Police Department. The Austin Police Department is loath to dig deep. They look for the most expedient conclusion. One individual I talked to, a father, a very prominent person, and I won't mention his name, told me about his son's death in Austin. He said the Austin Police Department concluded within a few days that his son's death was a suicide. And his grieving father fought with the Austin Police Department for many, many months to get them to do their jobs. And I'm talking about a prominent person, somebody you would all know, someone who's familiar with government and the way it works and the way it's supposed to work. This man, in his grief, had to hire his own investigators. He had to go to court and get a court order to get a second autopsy done. He got no help from the Austin Police Department. They closed ranks on him, just like they're closing ranks here. And they treated him as if he were some type of wrongdoer, just because he was just wanting to find out what happened to his son. All he wanted to know was what happened to his son. He wanted the death of his son investigated properly. I mean, it's not like we're asking a whole lot. We're asking the police department to do its job, to talk to all the witnesses, tell us who you spoke to, what they had to say, and everything that you did, and tell us why you've reached this conclusion. They won't do that. They can't do that, because if they were to do that, they would be exposed as jumping to conclusions and not doing their work. So here's the problem. The witnesses who know the most will not speak to us. The Austin Police Department has told them very specifically not to do so. And for those that maybe the police department has not told that, they've decided not to do so on their own. And that raises a question of why. Because we prefer that they speak to us willingly. But let me be clear about something. Whether they do it willingly or they have to be forced to do it, they're going to speak to us. We also are not in a position to obtain all the phone records or texts. I specifically asked the Austin Police Department, did you review the texts of each person in that apartment and the boyfriend? He said, we have no ability to do that. Now, I take that at face value because unless you have a subpoena from a grand jury, you can't do that. I understand that. I'm not a fool. But you can ask, and if the witness says, I refuse to let you see my texts, then you can take another step. We're going to have to see the texts, all the texts. And if they don't do it willingly, we're going to force them to do it. We've spoken to every witness who will willingly speak to us. There are more to speak to. We reviewed all the texts we can get our hands on. There are more that need to be reviewed. So, to that end, today, we filed suit in Travis County State Court. We filed suit against the Austin Blacks Rugby and the UT Latin Economics and Business Association. The claims in that lawsuit are straightforward. Breonna was obviously overserved. That's even the police have concluded that. She was overserved at that tailgate. She was not 21. Obviously, many others were overserved there. Many other people who were also minors. There are obviously laws that prohibit you from serving alcohol to minors, and there are laws that prohibit you from overserving people when you're serving them alcohol. By filing this lawsuit, not only will we hold accountable an entity or entities that were involved in overserving Breonna and other minors, but we will also be able to subpoena individuals and documents and video and data so we can continue our investigation. We will be able to compel witnesses so we can question them whether they want to or not. We will make available a copy of that petition that we filed last night to you. I think we have file stamp copies here. Through that case, not only will we hold accountable entities who we allege were overserving minors, but this will give us the ability to get to the bottom, once and for all, what happened that night. If the police department will not do their jobs, then we'll do it for them. So the takeaway from today's conference is this. We do not believe this was a suicide. We don't believe any of the facts whatsoever support that at all. We believe, based on our investigation, that Breonna was not alone in that apartment when she went over that railing. We don't know why she went over the railing. We're not suggesting anybody pushed her over the railing or anything in that sort at this point in time. We're simply saying that the witnesses that we have spoken to make it very clear that there was an argument that was taking place amongst several individuals in that apartment immediately before this young woman fell to her death. That's as far as we can go at this point. So the takeaway is this ain't over. This is far from over. We're going to get to the bottom of what happened, and now we're going to be able to do it with subpoena power and the power to compel the testimony of witnesses. And no matter what the answer turns out to be, no matter how painful it might be, we're going to get that answer. And I really appreciate your attention. And if you are a witness and you have information, please seek us out. We'd love to talk to you. We'll make it as painless on you as possible. But this family wants to know what happened to their daughter. Thank you.
Tony, do you have a minute for just a couple questions?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, so those were comments from lawyer Tony Busby about the death of Breonna Aguilera. You may remember us covering this story. She's a 19-year-old student that fell to her death from the balcony of a 17th floor apartment in Austin, Texas. She is a Texas A&M student. All evidence, how do I frame this? Austin police are saying that all evidence points to a suicide in this particular situation. And obviously, from listening to that press conference from lawyer Tony Busby, that is something that is in question for them, at least. And they are moving forward as follows with, they are investigating the situation. And Tony Busby obviously laid out some different pieces of evidence that they have gathered to call into question some of those conclusions. So it is a situation that we'll continue to follow as it plays out. And today was another step in that process. Okay, we've got a number of live events ongoing here. We were getting ready to go into a courthouse because the trial of former school police officer Adrian Gonzalez began today. Adrian Gonzalez was a school police officer at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, working there on the day of the massacre that occurred at that school. 19 children and 2 teachers killed on that day by a gunman. Gonzalez is accused of failing to protect children before the shooter got into the school. His lawyers say the only person responsible for that shooting is the gunman himself, who was ultimately killed by Border Patrol officers. So that trial has started. There is a live feed of the courtroom in that trial. Briefly, it was ongoing, but now the camera angle has shifted, as you can see on your screen here, down to somebody's tie. I believe that may have been Adrian Gonzalez himself, but I don't want to say that definitively because as we took the feed, the camera angle shifted down to that gentleman's tie. Now you see court proceedings sort of proceeding as we normally witness them with these types of live feeds. So I think that maybe now we can go live out to that courtroom. Let's briefly listen in as the trial of former school police officer Adrian Gonzalez again began today in Texas.
Old son to fill
Your parking lot or
the parking lot of the funeral home.
So right here.
Right about there. Yes,
So
sir.
this is for the jury. This is Geraldine Street, correct?
Correct.
And this Geraldine Street, it goes. If this is north, east, west, south, kind of towards the northwest of the school, all the way north.
Correct.
Okay. And so is it fair to say, or you tell me, where were you standing? Were you standing maybe here?
Not there, a little bit further, more towards up the, right about there, a little bit up.
And so you're saying that there was an officer that stopped here?
Not there, no, sir.
Where did the officer stop?
The officer, may I approach?
May he approach, Judge?
Yes.
The first police officer that I saw that was Uvalde Police Department, he parked right here, and that's where I was at, because I was telling him that the shooter had gone through this door.
So you're standing this close to okay. So you're saying that the officer was here, you're standing here, correct?
Correct. I was actually right in this area when the officer parked right here, and I was yelling at him, telling him that the shooter onto the.
Is that when you were still on 911?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so do you have any time of the time frame of when that was?
So unfortunately, I was not aware of in time.
Now, is it fair to say that that officer, whoever that officer was, and do you have any idea, could it have been these officers here?
It could have been.
Now, do you have any idea, or let me say, you agree, that this officer, whoever it was, did not run to the school?
Correct, I didn't.
So this officer, you told him very clearly that you saw, not the general location, that you saw exactly where the shooter entered, correct?
Correct, and I think if you hear the 911 call, you hear me telling them the officer, he went through that door.
Well, I did hear that. I think we all did, and that's why I'm asking you this question. But we just don't know which officer you're talking to, right?
Yeah, I don't.
Okay, so but you told an officer, because we can hear you in real time on 911, he went through this specific door.
Yes, sir.
You didn't say he's in this general location.
No.
You said, sir, he went through that, but we heard what you said.
Yes, sir.
And that officer did not make their way directly to that door.
Correct.
So is it fair to say that officer did not breach this door? Breach meaning go through the
Go
door?
through the door, no.
Did you get a chance to see where that officer went?
No, sir.
But by this time, and this is fairly quickly, this time there's a number of officers there.
That is correct.
And now that you know, once Adrian Gonzalez drives into the campus, you never make eyes on him, correct?
No, sir.
You never see what he's
Where
doing
he
or
went,
not
no,
doing.
no, sir.
You never saw him come around to the west side of the door,
No,
the west side of the school.
No, sir.
You never saw a female come to the west side of the school.
No, sir.
But what you do know for sure is that you told an officer exactly what door the shooter went in, and that officer did not follow them in.
Correct.
And it wasn't the same officer, Adrian Gonzalez, that drove behind the school towards the danger.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Limones. Pass the witness, Judge.
No further questions? Subject to recall, either side?
He's fine to be released, Judge.
He can be released. Okay, sir, you are released from the subpoena. The rule has been invoked, so I'd ask you not to talk to anybody about the case until you're aware the trial is over with. But you're free to go, not subject to recall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your next witness. Jason Shea. There's fine. Good afternoon, sir. Would you raise your right hand, please? You do solemnly swear the evidence in the testimony given in this cause will be the truth, so help you God.
Yes, sir.
All right. Go ahead and have a seat. Make yourself comfortable. Adjust that microphone if you need to.
Thank you, sir.
You may proceed. Thank you, Your Honor. Would you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
My name is Jason Shea, and I'm with the Texas Rangers.
And how long have you been in law enforcement?
Since 1998, so about 27 years.
And would you briefly go through what your duties have been in law enforcement?
So in 1998, I graduated the DPS Training Academy, was assigned to the Highway Patrol. I was in the Highway Patrol for about 8 years. Promoted and was a Highway Patrol Sergeant for about 7 years. And then in 2013, I promoted into the Texas Rangers. And about 3 years ago, I went into cold cases, and now I just promoted as a lieutenant, staff lieutenant with the Rangers in our cold case program.
And what is a cold case?
Definition of cold cases is there's not a set definition for it. So I was under a grant through the Department of Justice where we used advanced DNA testing to identify suspects in cases. Utilizing kinship testing and genealogy.
Okay. Have you also done training in crime scene investigations?
Yes.
And would you explain what your training is?
So initially it's through your basic DPS Texas Ranger crime scene investigation, from blood spatter to crime scene investigation photography.
And have you conducted crime scene investigations?
Yes.
Few or many?
Many.
Okay. As you work with law enforcement, have you likewise become familiar with guns?
Okay, a brief look there at the trial for Adrian Gonzalez regarding the Uvalde shooting. Now, that is a trial that we will continue to cover as it progresses. We will, if there is a live feed into that courtroom, we will be checking in when we can throughout the coming days. But we are going to continue to jump around here. Now, we do want to note, we mentioned as we were trying to break down that trial, there was that close-up on the tie. We said that might be Adrian Gonzalez. Based on everything we could see from our visual, that was not Adrian Gonzalez. They showed Adrian Gonzalez actually sitting in full frame there, quietly observing the proceedings. That was Adrian Gonzalez, the officer who was charged in this particular trial. Again, a trial that we will continue to follow as it unfolds. Now, we have a lot of live events going on right now, so we want to move over to the next one that is occurring as we speak. The Texas American Federation of Teachers, or AFT, has filed a federal lawsuit over investigations into comments made by Texas educators in the days after the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. So again, this is a federal lawsuit over the investigations into comments made by Texas educators in the days after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. The lawsuit was filed Tuesday, today, in Travis County against the Texas Education Agency and its commissioner. It's arguing that the investigations violated educators' First Amendment rights. So the argument is that the investigations into the comments made by Texas educators violated those educators' First Amendment rights. Let's go live out to the press conference as it is happening now in Texas.
Media channel there is. They needed their superintendent in the state to give some advice and some clarity on how we make kids feel safe the next day, how we help their parents, how we help each other, since it terrorized everyone. And instead, what happened was it got blame and shame and a star chamber. And so at the heart of this case, it is about Mr. Morath's actions and continued actions and the danger that it's doing to an environment of teaching and learning, not just for the more than 300 people who have been investigated, but what it means in terms of how do you teach? How do you deal with issues that are tough, that are hard? And so let me be crystal clear. Speaking for the AFT, both the AFT and Texas AFT denounced political violence. We abhor political violence. We denounced it within minutes. I denounced it within minutes of when I saw it. We denounced Charlie Kirk's assassination. We denounced violence after Uvalde. We denounce violence. We denounce violence after Rob Reiner's death, after Melissa Hortman's death. But today, and what happened?
Okay, we are jumping out of this particular press conference faster than usual because Virginia Senator Mark Warner has just taken the podium in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol building. Let's listen in on Senator Warner.
The challenge is this. We have an economic chokehold on Venezuela at this point by the blockade. To restore, though, Venezuela's oil exporting ability to about 1 million barrels a day, to get back up to where it was a decade plus ago, 4 million barrels a day, will literally take 2 to 4 years of rebuilding and some level of security for companies that go in. We couldn't get an answer as well as how much is the cost of having 20% of our fleet, the largest armada assembled in the Caribbean since the 20th century, How much per day is it costing our fleet to be stationed off of Venezuela, maintaining that economic chokehold? And by the fact that at the end of the day, the Venezuelans are going to pay for all of this, or Venezuelan oil, does that mean that 20% of the fleet has to stay there a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? These are the kind of questions that need to be answered. And I'll also echo what Senator Schumer said. A lot of our Virginians over the holidays lost their health insurance. This does nothing to make health insurance more affordable, groceries more affordable, drive down the cost of rent. That's what the American people want the President and the Congress to focus on. With that, my friend, Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Senator Warner. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Warner.
Okay, speaking of Virginia representatives, we are now going to go to former Virginia Congressperson Elaine Luria, former representative of the 2nd District right here in Hampton Roads, and has launched a campaign to once again run for that 2nd District seat. Elaine Luria spoke earlier today at the January 6th committee hearing, so we are going to listen in on her comments from earlier today now.
States Senate. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Lofgren. I'll now recognize our witnesses for 5 minutes to provide summaries of their testimony. Their full written remarks will be submitted for the record. Representative Luria, you're recognized.
Thank you to Leader Jeffries, Representative Thompson, and my former colleagues from the Select Committee. I'm grateful to be back in the Capitol. But unfortunately, what brings us together today is the somber remembrance that 5 years ago, the Capitol and our democratic process were under attack by a mob summoned by President Donald Trump. As a retired naval officer who served 2 decades in uniform, I first took the oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, at the age of 17 when I entered the United States Naval Academy as a midshipman. And then again as a member of Congress, as we all do. My service has been to this country and to the Constitution. My focus this morning will be what the Select Committee exposed about Donald Trump's failure to uphold his oath, which states to the best of his ability to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and his dereliction of duty as Commander-in-Chief, and furthermore, how this has persisted during his 2nd term in office. President Trump's failure to act to end the violence that day, his rewriting and whitewashing of history, and his mass pardons of January 6 rioters, literally transforming hundreds of convicted and violent criminals into political martyrs and folk heroes, has served to undercut the rule of law and in turn weakened our democratic institutions. Veterans of our armed services know firsthand the leadership that is required in a time of crisis, urgent and decisive action that puts the country first. But on January 6th, when lives and our democracy hung in the balance, President Trump, as Commander-in-Chief, refused to act because of his selfish desire to stay in power. Think about what we saw on January 6th. Undeniable violence at the Capitol, the Vice President being evacuated to safety by the Secret Service, senators running through the hallways to escape the mob, law enforcement valiantly defending the Capitol against brutal attack. As Commander-in-Chief, President Trump was oath and duty bound to protect the Capitol. But for over 3 hours, as Adam and I in our hearing described in detail, for 187 minutes, he disregarded the advice and pleas from his closest staff and his own family members to take action, to simply speak the words necessary to stop the violence and send the rioters home. And furthermore, when he spoke, he addressed those who instigated the violence with words of solidarity. He said, "I know your pain. I know you're hurt." He doubled down on the stolen election claims and then finally said, "I know how you feel, but go home and go in peace." President Trump also bears responsibility for the extreme delay in the D.C. National Guard arriving at the Capitol until after the violence had largely subsided. The D.C. National Guard is unique. It answers directly to the president. Senior Guard leaders have since testified that President Trump could have expedited the Guard's deployment with a single phone call. Instead, the Guard waited for hours, despite being positioned merely blocks away at the D.C. Armory. Rather than act, President Trump watched the chaos unfold on television from his private West Wing dining room. He made no call to deploy the Guard. Instead, he watched the attacks on Vice President Pence and justified the mob's "Hang Mike Pence" chants as common sense. The Guard arrived 3 hours and 19 minutes after being requested, well after the worst of the violence had already occurred. We'll never know how many law enforcement officers might have been spared their brutal injuries, or how many lives might have been saved had the commander-in-chief done his duty in the moment when it mattered the most. What we do know is that it was an outrageous dereliction of duty and a profound violation of President Trump's oath of office. President Trump has rescripted the norms of government service to require personal loyalty over loyalty to the Constitution. Our military leadership has resisted this and has held firm despite ever-increasing pressure. Yet President Trump continues to blur the lines between the duty of the military to the Constitution and his political aims. Days after losing the 2020 presidential election, President Trump fired Secretary of Defense Mark Esper for this very reason, insufficient personal loyalty. This was an extraordinary action by a lame duck president during a presidential transition that alarmed national security professionals on both sides of the aisle. Secretary Esper had resisted Trump's efforts to use the active duty military forces for domestic political purposes. He imposed invoking the Insurrection Act to deploy troops to American streets during protests. He counseled against Trump's suggestions that troops should just shoot protesters. Since resuming office, President Trump has again politicized the armed forces, opening a baseless investigation into the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. He and his administration purged senior military leadership and fired the service branch's top lawyers, simply deeming them roadblocks. He threatened to recall a sitting U.S. senator to active duty to be tried for claims of sedition under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. This is an extraordinary step to weaponize DOD against a member of the legislative branch. He has described fellow Americans as the enemy within, suggested the military straighten out American cities, and even proposed using American communities as military training grounds. These statements coincided with troop deployments to American cities over the objections of state and local leaders, and with a systematic effort to muzzle the Pentagon reporting by restricting press access to the Pentagon unless pre-approved by the administration. As someone who served in military and in uniform for 2 decades, I find this vision for our military deeply un-American. President Trump did not only attack this building and our democracy, he attacked the fundamental idea that the military serves the Constitution, not a man, not a party, and not a political agenda. This trend has only accelerated since his explicit display of dereliction of duty on January 6th, and should stand as a warning to all Americans that living in a free democracy is not self-executing. It depends on leaders and citizens choosing to uphold our values. We owe it to the law enforcement officers who defended the Capitol, those serving in uniform today, and the generations to come to lead that fight. And this is one that I will never abandon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And former Congresswoman Loria talking at length about President Donald Trump during those comments. Well, President Donald Trump spoke at length today before we took to our live Impact News stream. We're going to play as many of his comments as we can here. We've only got about 7 minutes left in the stream, but let's listen in for now to finish out the show.
Out to his wife, Jill, and his entire family. You know, he voted with me 100% of the time. And by the way, he wasn't a 3 o'clock in the morning person. Do you know what I mean by that? Where the speaker goes, "Sir, could you call up? Could you call?" I said, "What time is it, Speaker?" "Sir, it's 3 in the morning. Could you make a couple of calls?" "How many?" 9. So I'd start calling 3 in the morning. I said, I shouldn't use any names. I'm just going to create problems. But hi, Jim, and I'm not talking about Jim Jordan. I never had a call 3 in the morning for him. But I said, "Hi, Jim, how you doing?" They just called to say hello, 3, okay, sir. Sir, you haven't spoken to me in 3 years, and it's now 3 a.m, so I know what you want. You want my vote? And usually almost always they'd give it, but they wanted to be called. And with Doug, I never had to call. He was with us right from the beginning. I love those guys. I must say I probably love them the best, the guys that I don't have to call. They know we're doing the right thing. I have a couple that are going to be with us all the way, but they just want the call. They want love. They need love. They're more insecure than most of you. It's true. No, most of you are secure people. They're all laughing. No, most of you are secure people. I had a couple say, look, I could have Trump call me all the time. I just have to break his ass a little bit. And he'll be calling. But I appreciate those. We actually had a little party. We opened up a beautiful section of the White House in the Rose Garden, and we had a party for all of those people that I never speak to and vote for me. And, I spoke to Doug, but I didn't speak to him never had a problem. And I was really saddened by his passing and was thinking about not even doing the speech in his honor. But then I decided that I have to do it in his honor. I'll do it in his honor because he would have wanted it that way. He would have wanted it that way. He would have said, do that speech. Are you kidding me? Do the speech, big guy. But he was a fantastic person. Man, that was a quick one. I don't know quite yet what happened, but boy, it's a tough one. He was just with us. He was our friend, all of us, every one of us. And I also want to send our best wishes to Congressman Jim Baird and his wife, who are recovering from a car accident. They're going to be okay, but they had a pretty bad accident. And we're praying that they get out of that hospital very quickly. He's going to be fine. She's going to be fine, but it was a bad accident. And I want to thank the man who has been central to so many of our triumphs. He really has been. He's the guy that would call me to make those calls all the time. He's always working. And he's a nice person. He's a high quality person. But I want to tell you, he's a very tough cookie. I've seen both sides. Not often do I have to see the other side because he's just, by nature, he's a very fine, religious. I like that. He's a religious person. I like that. I like religious people. It usually means they're more honest. Sometimes it doesn't happen that way. I've had some real religious ones that did numbers on me, and I said, I'm going to get them someday. They got me by surprise, but it's usually good, okay, right? And his name is Mike Johnson, Speaker Mike Johnson. He has my complete and total endorsement. Stand up, Speaker. So, but it is true. A lot of times they'll say, I wish Mike were tougher. He's tough. He's tough as anybody in the room, actually. But can't be tough when you have a majority of 3. And now, sadly, a little bit less than that. A little bit less than that, maybe. But you can't be Trump. You can't, I want you. You make 10 enemies, 20 enemies. That's the end of that, right? Everybody loves him. I would say there's one person he's given up on. I think he just gave up on this guy. He's so bad. He never votes for us. But no matter how good, he won't vote for us. There's a sickness there. There's something wrong. You can have the greatest bill.
Okay, so we did not get to hear much of President Donald Trump's speech there. That is a speech at a House GOP retreat, and it went for some time, but we had a very busy day, a lot of events happening today, and so we didn't get to hear very much of that speech, but we heard a lot of different stories today, press conferences, courtrooms, interviews here in studio, and that does bring us to the conclusion of Live Impact News here on this Tuesday. Nia Campbell, do you have a tease for us?
I do have a tease.
Okay.
Coming up right after this, do not change the channel. We have Democracy Divided, stories of the Capitol riot via WUSA.
Very well done. Do not change the channel. As you heard, more content to come at the conclusion of Live Impact News. But it is, in fact, the conclusion of Live Impact News. For Nia Campbell, I'm Connor Real. That'll do it. Hope to see everybody tomorrow.
you.